Hi there, this is my assignment for the book bingo assignment for INS 6510. This is Robbie, and we're doing all the categories, all of the book bingo categories. We got 9 books here that we're going to go through and give a little talk and review on. You don't have to sit and watch the whole 20-minute video. Just watch the first 3, and then we're set. All my references and citations, the ISBN numbers for the books will be at the very end. Hope you enjoy. The first book we're going to look at is a picture book called Wonderful Goodbyes, written and illustrated by Kelly Wu. This is a book intended for kindergarten to 2nd grade readers, although you could read it to kids who are older if you're still looking to talk about the very serious issue of grief and death among pets. This one is new. It just came out in June of this year, so it's a relatively recent book that's just been released, but I really liked it, and I like the illustrations in it as well too. Wonderful Goodbyes acts as a guide for dealing through and processing like the incoming grief for a child who knows their pet is sadly not long for this world. The unnamed narrator in this book goes through many different activities that her and her dog liked to do: drawing, coloring, going on walks, etc., etc. Some of the other books I discussed in my Padlet bibliography might have more of an emotional impact and resonance because they deal with like a character on their own. Our narrator in this is unnamed, so though you get a lot of information about Bailey and her time with them, you don't really know a lot about her, but that also kind of allows you to kind of slot in yourself or the child that you would be reading this to and use this as a template to kind of how to deal with grief. I think overall the book is really well illustrated and it's really good. I would give it personally 5 out of 5 stars. I don't think there's too much better they could have done with this. The next book we're going to look at is a poetry collection called Garvey in the Dark, written by Nikki Grimes and published in 2022. This is a book intended for middle grade audiences, although I think anyone of any age could enjoy it. I really did. This book is a collection of poems told from the perspective of Garvey, a Black teenager living in California during the opening stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think this is a really insightful look into the mind of a teenager and their experiences during school lockdowns, during virtual learning, and especially during the George Floyd murder and uprisings that came during the summer of 2020. Nikki Garvey uses a specific style of poetry that originates in Japan called tanka. Tanka has a specific 5-line format of 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5, 7, and then 7. I think it could have been interesting to see some shorter poems, so ones that play with different lyric and stanza structure, or some even longer, free-flowing ones that might, like, quote-unquote, break the style during certain intense moments. But I think all the poems are well written and kind of capture the essence of tanka poetry, which is supposed to be short, brief descriptions of a specific moment in time. So Nikki Grimes does a really good job of capturing these small, tiny moments that made up like the larger minutia of time blending together during the pandemic. There's really good imagery and language description, and everything as simple as Garvey being upset that he can't play video games with a friend who isn't able to video chat, of seeing his sister slowly kind of become more lethargic and depressed when she's not able to practice track anymore, and then the very real anger and rage and fear that he feels watching the George Floyd murder take place like live, and then watching the uprising that happened after that as well. Overall, I think that in the next coming years, either Garvey in the Dark or books like it highlighting the experience of teenagers during the COVID-19 pandemic are going to become a lot more relevant and a lot more prescient. So I would definitely recommend reading it. It is an excellent encapsulation of that. I would give it 5 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend. Next book genre we're going to explore is fantasy. This is a middle grade fiction book called Amir and the Jinn Princess. It's written by M.T. Khan and it was published just a few months ago in October of 2024. This book details the adventures of Amir. He is a Pakistani boy living in Pakistan. He's the heir and the only child of a very wealthy Pakistani construction conglomerate. However, his mother has mysteriously disappeared within the last few months, and he is looking for answers that his dad and his family are unable to provide. Amir has a chance encounter with the Jinn princess in question, Shamsa, She is in a competition with her other siblings of the Jin royalty in order to become the Jin monarch, king or queen, to rule over the Jin kingdom. Amir and Shamsa travel through the mystical train into the Jin kingdom, and Amir has to help Shamsa succeed in these various trials to prove she is the most deserving of eventually becoming the ruler of her kingdom. This book would be really good for readers who liked Percy Jackson and the Olympians or the Princess Academy series. The main thrust is kind of like a very traditional adventure story. Amir has to help Shamsa succeed in these trials, and he has traits that can help her as she goes through, and she has to learn from him about bravery, about knowledge, about morality, and doing what's right to lead the kingdom. I think overall it's very entertaining exploring the Jin kingdom and the different mythology that you see that MT Khan brings to it. If there's any criticism I could give, it's that Amir himself kind of starts as like a fully perfect character. The first sentence out of the book is, "I'm a rich kid and they treat me differently," and that's not okay. It's like he starts the book completely perfect, and Shamsa, the princess in question, is the one who needs to do all of the growing, all of the development. There's not like really much that changes for Amir from the first page of the story to the end. Overall, I still really liked it though. I think it's a very good adventure story that will give students a different perspective, a different culture that they may not have experienced yet. I would give it 4 out of 5 stars. We're gonna snake through our bingo card right here. So going downwards from fantasy, we have our award winner category. This book I chose is the Newbery Award medal winner called Hello Universe by Erin Entrada Kelly. This book was originally published in 2017. It's a realistic fiction book intended for middle grade audiences. It kind of features an ensemble cast of characters, each with their own point of view chapters. There's Virgil, who is a very shy Filipina student who kind of gets bullied by other kids. There is Valencia, a deaf girl whose need for independence has made her very stubborn and kind of standoffish towards other people. There is Kaori, who is a Japanese girl who's very obsessed with astrology and fortune telling, but that's kind of led her to have a very like universe has designed it perspective towards things. And there is Chet, the neighborhood bully. No one really likes Chet. The story is kind of tethered together by a prank that Chet plays on Virgil, where he throws his guinea pig inside a backpack down like a well, and so Virgil gets stuck in the well while he's trying to rescue his guinea pig, and then the other characters are kind of like out and like searching for him and trying to interact with each other too. I think this book has a really good exploration of identity, of how you fit in with your community, about when to open up to people, and how to do that based on various personality types. It has a really strong message too, if you're a student reading this coming from some of these identity groups, if you're Filipino, if you're Japanese, if you're deaf, if you're really obsessed with fortune telling like Kaori is, all the astrology kids are gonna really, really love it. My main complaint with this book is the tagline that you see here. It says some friendships are meant to be, and it kind of has this like adventure in the woods, like we're going to be doing Stand By Me, like we're going on an adventure together. A lot of the development the characters go through is largely internal, by them reflecting on their own and not really like interacting all together as a group there. A lot of the action too, I would say, is very slow to start. Virgil doesn't fall into the well until about like halfway into the book. I think a lot of kids, they might kind of be turned off by how like slow the book is and how like there's not much external quote unquote action that's happening. All the characters aren't even together until like the final chapter of the book. I think it's still a very good book. I would say if anything, it's a good kids book for adults. Overall, I would give this one 3 out of 5 stars. It's not bad. I just think it might not hit a lot of things some kids are looking for. Moving across, we're going to look at the next category, which was nonfiction. The book I chose is called Make Your Mark, Make a Difference, written by Joan Marie Gallant. This book was originally published in February of this year, so it just came out a little while ago. It's definitely intended for middle grade audiences. Again, kind of on the higher end of that, I would say. Make Your Mark kind of acts as a template for good activism for students who are under 18. I think this book is a highly needed resource for students. So often we can feel apathetic and powerless in terms of massive forces that seem beyond our control, and this gives a lot of good, concise ways that students can impact things, specifically on a local level. The book is kind of broken up into different causes or different areas of causes, mainly environmental, social, and then economic ones. I think that Joan Gallant does a really good job of giving concrete examples of things that students can do. She gives all these checklists throughout the books of this is what you can do if you're looking to advocate for the environment. This is how you would talk to someone. She gives examples of how to channel your activism into creativity. And I think she also includes a very important lesson about making sure that you don't get discouraged towards the end of the book or disappointed at the pace of progress. Environmental policy is very important. Eliminating gun violence is very important. Those issues still affect students whether they can vote or not. I definitely think the author's approach to this book was to encourage kids to shoot for the moon, and if you miss, you'll land among the stars. I say this because, one, there's a chapter that's totally about keeping space clean, eliminating space debris. Not saying that that's not an important issue, but it's definitely kind of exceeding perhaps the scope of what an individual student or even groups of students are able to accomplish. But I think that same kind of the vastness of the issue translates onto other things that Joan Marie Gallant talks about here. A lot of these things are legislated at the state or even the federal level. So I don't really think Joan Marie Gallant gives an example of how to kind of scale up or organize with other kids in order to get that done. Overall though, I think using this book as a jumping off point to get students interested in activism, or if they're already interested, give them some ideas on what to do, is a great resource. Especially middle school students might be looking for ways they can help about these issues but are uncertain of where to start. I think this would be a pretty good example. I would give it personally 4 out of 5 stars. We're going to move on to the biography category and finish out the row. The book I chose was She Was the First, The Trailblazing Life of Shirley Chisholm. This is written by Catherine Russell Brown, illustrated by Eric Velasquez, and was originally published in 2020. This is a book intended for, I would say, around 1st to 3rd grade readers. It's mainly a picture book, so it's definitely intended for younger audiences. This book covers the life of Shirley Chisholm. If you don't know who she was the first Black woman elected to the United States Congress, and was also the first person, either Black or a woman, to run for the Democratic nomination for president. The book is kind of split into 2 halves. The first is about Shirley's childhood, growing up. I learned a lot of information about Shirley Chisholm that I'd never had before from this book, including that she spent a lot of her childhood in Barbados, which I thought was really, really interesting. She also worked as a teacher for quite some time before she actually entered activism and got elected into the New York Assembly. Seeing how Shirley Chisholm's childhood and her upbringing in a lower class family in Brooklyn and her experiences in Barbados, where she didn't experience too much racism compared to back in Brooklyn, really shaped her desire to enter politics and be an advocate for people. A lot of times when you do biographies about Shirley Chisholm, you kind of end right at the point when she runs for the Democratic nomination for president unsuccessfully. And I think that kind of does her dirty a little bit. As the book itself notes, she passed laws to help sick people get the medicine they need, to make sure landlords kept the heat on in the winter. There's a lot of her work and her activism and the legislation she helped pass, both before and after she ran for Democratic Party nominee, that I think gets overlooked. And I had wished maybe they had talked a little bit more about her life after that, instead of kind of ending on she ran and tried her best but didn't make it. Overall, I think this is still a really excellent book though, showing an example of someone who has experienced the challenges of being a working class American, the challenges of racism, and what they did not only to overcome that, but to make sure they cleared the way for other Americans too and advocate for them as well. I would also add that all the illustrations are really, really good too. Eric Velasquez does a great job showing all the different parts of Shirley Chisholm's life, very well drawn illustrated pictures. I would give this 4 out of 5 stars. Really recommend it for young readers. For my selection for a fiction book, I chose Further Than the Moon. This is a book written by Lindsay Lackey. It was published originally in 2023, and this is intended for middle grade readers. The story focuses on Houston, aptly named, who is a middle schooler very interested in becoming an astronaut. He and his brother Robbie, who has cerebral palsy, epilepsy, he uses a wheelchair and is nonverbal, are both very interested in spaceflight and both have thought about going to the moon together for such a long time. Houston gets picked to go to space camp with his grandfather, who is a famous astronaut, and obviously Robbie feels very bad about being left behind and not being able to be included in that. Houston goes through his lessons at space camp called JARP, learning more about the ability to become an astronaut. And as he's going through, he kind of confronts the other students at the school and learns about their backgrounds. He has to deal with ableism from some of the instructors and some of the other students and confronts them about them and saying, hey, like, you shouldn't use non-inclusive language like the word like idiot or spaz. I think this is a very, very interesting book, especially if you have students who are interested in outer space or spaceflight. The science and the research and like the training to all become an astronaut is extremely accurate and very, very interesting and cool. I could almost call it like Harry Potter, but if Harry Potter went to space camp. I think too that the author's specific inclusion of ideas on how you would have a character who has cerebral palsy, who does use a wheelchair, who has a physical disability, would get to space was very interesting. Acknowledgement of this only comes in the author's note at the end when they mention a few real life programs that do exist, one called Astro Access and another through the European Space Agency's para-astronaut program. So there's obviously a safety concern there, like if your like body is able to handle the G-forces or what like accommodations would be needed to construct that. But those programs do actually exist. I wish that Lindsay Lackey had included that into the text of the book instead of the author's note at the end. Would have been a really interesting way to kind of incorporate that. There is a really good discussion where like Houston is trying to find a way to like include Robbie and makes like a robot mascot of him, and that doesn't go over very well because it's not like he's actually included, it's just a substitute. I still think this is a very excellent book and I would highly recommend it. I would give it 5 out of 5 stars. Our next book is our pick for historical fiction. I chose the book In the Tunnel by Julie Lee. This was originally published in 2023 and is again intended for middle grade audiences. In the Tunnel follows Mung-gi, who is a bookish Korean teenager living with other Appa, his mother Uma, and his sister Yami. They live in what will eventually become North Korea after the Korean War takes place. Mother is initially arrested by the North Korean secret police and drafted into the army. Mung-gi feels kind of guilty because he thinks, oh, it was like some information that he left out that led to this arrest. So the book is actually told through 2 alternating timelines. His mother and sister and grandmother escaping from North Korea into what will become the South during 1950. The second part is from 1952, told when Mung-gi actually goes back and joins the army of the Republic of Korea or the South Korean army and tries to find his dad on the front lines and like help him escape and get back home. Overall, I really, really liked this book. The Korean War isn't something that's usually taught very often in like American schools, and it was a really interesting glimpse into the time period and the lived experiences of the people who were most impacted by this. I think it does a really good job of setting the history and the culture of Korea at this time. You see in the beginning how the country is eventually liberated, say, the Japanese Empire by the Soviets and Chinese forces, and then eventually how this transitions over time as the administration becomes more and more dictatorial, how they lose certain rights and other privileges. The chapters showcasing the family's flight down into South Korea have a lot of tension in them. You're like, I don't know who's gonna make it out here, who's a safe person to trust or not. Similarly, with all the chapters that take place in the future with Mung-gi on the front lines, him and his fellow soldiers trying to resolve and like very awful battle. The book reminds me a lot of Grenade by Alan Grant. So if you're a student who is interested in like mid 20th century history or like war books or something of that nature, I would really, really recommend it. If there's anything that I could offer as feedback, I would some of the institutions of what will become the South Korean government, because there's a lot of things that happen there that weren't necessarily great. The author Julie Lee is actually a first-generation immigrant descended from someone who escaped North Korea, so she understands kind of the complexities and the difficulty of doing that, and makes sure to share the challenges of living in North Korea, like in modern day too. Really highly recommend it. 5 out of 5 stars. The lights are brighter now because it's getting dark outside. Our final book here on my pick for realistic fiction, it's called Not If You Break Up With Me First by G.F. Miller. This book was originally published in September of 2024 and is again intended for middle grade readers. The book features two protagonists, Eve and Andrew, who are meeting again after summer break, going into 8th grade for the first time. Andrew has had a bit of a summer glow up, and so has Eve, and so their respective friend groups are both pushing them to ask the other out. Eve takes the first shot and says, "Hey Andrew, will you go to the dance with me?" He accepts, and they go to the dance. Doesn't really go well. They both are independently thinking we work better as best friends than as a couple, but neither of them wants to be the first one to say it. They both concoct increasingly harebrained schemes to make the other dislike them, so the other will break up with them first without having to ruin the friendship. Hijinks ensue, and they both, learn their lesson eventually about communicating what you want in a relationship. Having done the peer pressured into dating your friend jive in middle school, I can say this book presents a good case study of why you should avoid peer pressure and how to effectively communicate with someone when you feel things aren't going your way. The book is also pretty genuinely hilarious at times. I found myself chuckling a lot through it, especially at the text bubbles and the language that the kids would text to each other. I thought it was a really great depiction of how middle schools talk to one another. I personally would give it 5 out of 5 stars. No issues with it at all. I think it has a really good and deserved ending, and I think it's actually a really important message for kids to understand before they start getting into high school and dating, a little more seriously. That was a lot of books. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you got some good recommendations for your school, your library, yourself, your kids, whoever you're going to read them for. Thank you for staying and watching this whole time if you did that.